But we also have to be creative, we have to be innovative.
We need to include the local content secretariat. Very, very significant.
First of all, let me thank you, various stakeholders, for joining this initiative of the Diaspora Unit of our ministry, and certainly examining and dealing with a very important topic, a topic that has impact on the pace and the quality of development of our country in every area, in every facet of the country's operation, whether it's in the private or public sector. We know the issues of human resources has become a challenge. And sometimes, as they say, your success also breeds, from time to time, new problems. And given the pace and the accelerated pace of our country, and the current trajectory in terms of what our goals are and what the targets that have been outlined, particularly by the President, where he wants the country to be by 2030. If we look at the LCDS 2030 plan and some of the other documents and commitments that have been made, we will see that this accelerated approach can also be stymied by the lack of adequate human resources. And we have to be, in many regards, innovative, and rather not take the traditional approach that we've had in terms of addressing human resources of our country. And one of which is that how it is that we can tap our global diaspora. You know, sometimes there's always the debate, and sometimes it can be controversial, as to how much foreign input do we want to have in our human resources bank, and how much more can we do in terms of ensuring that Guyanese, and when I say Guyanese, not only those domiciled in Guyana, but Guyanese in the global diaspora, that they too are given the opportunity. But there's so much that we can do in encouraging, in networking, and in reaching out to the global diaspora. But we cannot wait forever on the global diaspora to be responsive to, because road projects, building a school, the private sector development, they cannot sit and wait for us to find these Guyanese, as much as we would want everyone to be part of and to be involved in. But we also have to be creative, we have to be innovative. And that's why I do hope the discussions here will not only be on approaching this constraint in a traditional way, but also that we have an open mind, a much more enlightened perspective. And I see people around this table who I'm quite sure, given their work, both private and public sector, can come up with some of the solutions that we can offer to the various agencies, the various entities in addressing this particular issue. And we want this to be a continuing process, because it cannot be dealt with in a one-off way. And that is why that we hope that the follow-up work will continue to be engaging, and we'll see your intense participation, and given your as I said, your own experience and what you do in many regards. You know, we sometimes say that currently, and I think the number is rising, we started an estimate that we are 100,000 persons short in terms of what we need in our skilled and semi-skilled workforce. And perhaps that number can be large. But also, we see another challenge too, whereby, and we have to find how it is that we can address that, Because in some parts of our country too, we have persons who are not fully employed. So whilst take for instance in Region 4, you may have a particular shortage, you may find in Region 2 or Region 10, you may have surplus. And so I hope that we can also examine that too, because a lot of those persons, take for instance Region 6 too, Region 1, a lot of Guyanese would have, who live in the border areas, would have returned, but they would have originally come out of those communities, and that's where they returned. So we have to also find a way in which how we can reach out to them and to get them to involve, because it may be some of the solutions, some of the persons that we're looking for, maybe in those communities themselves. So we have to find that approach to how it is that we can involve and engage them too in addressing some of those particular challenges. The other issue too, in terms of how do we deal with that particular gap too, is looking at the wider issue of migration. And it's an issue that will have to be a national conversation on. You know, what is the best migration policy that we have? We've started some work. We've started some work, particularly with the IOM in this regard. But certainly it's a conversation that we will have to address in our minds very soon, very urgently, in addressing this issue of human resources. But as I said, it is not a top-down approach that we are taking in addressing this particular issue. But as you can see here today, the wide cross-section of stakeholders, it is intended to have a bottom-up approach in terms of how do we deal with this particular issue. So those are just briefly some of the remarks. I know the first stakeholder session, which I couldn't attend, was out of the country, but we had presentations by both Ministers Singh and Edghill, and Minister Robeson Bentu, whose ministry is deal with that particular issue. So I'm quite sure they would have given particular perspectives from the executive how it is that we plan to approach. But at the end of the day, it is the involvement of all stakeholders, I think, coming up, as I said, with creative and innovative approaches in terms of how do we address the human resources constraint that we face, and how do we involve the global diaspora, how do we tap what exists in our country so that we can continue to be able to have the man and woman power to fuel and to ensure that the development, the progress, and the projects that we have are timely and sufficiently implemented, and that the prosperity and the development that all of us want for our country cannot come about if we do not have the quality and the sufficiency of number of our human resources. So again, I want to thank you for participating, and certainly I'm quite sure we will see some results given the commitment and the quality of persons who are sitting around the table here today. Thank you again.
From a policy perspective, because execution-wise, there's a lot to be done if we are going to be attracting the labor that is needed, skilled, semi-skilled, unskilled, to really drive the economy forward. But to just also consider an immigration policy of how we can get people in a lot more efficiently. At the moment, that's the biggest concern. So many projects need people, and it takes anywhere from, on average, 4 weeks, but it could be stretched out to longer than that. So in many cases, if we can look at the digital system that turns it into hours or minutes, where people upload all their stuff, it goes through an automatic checking system, you know, much like the single window that we have for housing. Why not a single window for immigration? We know we need people. I think that has been agreed to this point with all the stakeholders. And then the second point, just from a policy perspective as well, is to consider the approach that we are taking towards employment at the moment. I know that the government is engaged in many initiatives to lessen the burden that many people are facing, especially the ones that are not earning a lot, with various programs where they have maybe a work program that they receive 40,000, or a voucher program where they get some assistance for their family. But we also would like to create some incentives that encourage employment. And one of the best ones is to have people retain more of their earned income. So also consider things like increasing the threshold on the taxes, maybe reducing taxes now. Guyana is now listed as a high-income country, which makes us actually, it puts us at the worst off position globally, because now we cannot benefit from a lot of the conditions that helped us when we were low and middle income. But as a population, it hasn't really touched the population as yet, and you know, the cost of living keeps increasing. So if we can also make it attractive for people to actually work and retain their money, because in Barbies, we have a lot of our members are claiming that they're losing employees because it's more feasible for the employee to take the 40,000 and show up for 2 or 3 days than to work for 80,000 and have to show up there 5 to 6 days per week. So it's creating some pressures that I would request that you take a look at it from a policy perspective. I know taxation is always a sore subject, but we have revenue coming in from other sources that we did not have a couple of years ago, so that we do make it very attractive for people, to locals and foreigners, to get employed here in Guyana. I just wanted to share that.
The whole issue has to be dealt with in a holistic manner. So we can look in terms of incentivizing people to work and incentivizing companies and employers to engage and to be able to hold and attract the competent skills that they have. And we have started that process, but it has to be a gradual one too. And so it has to also fit in within the whole broader framework. But if we look over time, what has been done from budget to budget, you can see that we're moving in that direction. But I can understand the impatience too. You know, the intent of having these grants and this support was to incentivize people to. Wasn't meant to do the reverse, to take people out of the workforce, but rather was to be, because in some areas the job opportunities are not as prolific as they are in other areas. And so that's why it was very targeted in those communities, hoping that this would be in a way to assist until persons could find the type of jobs that can pay them and give them a comfortable lifestyle. But that was not the intention, and I'm quite sure over time too that people would recognize that. I mean, we had that particular issue too, not only with government grants, but we had an issue where from the global diaspora, where relatives used to send money back to their relatives in Guyana. And I could remember even in the sugar industry, a person used to turn up for 3 days. And because they were getting this $200 or $300 US as remittance, and that was for them, when they put the couple days work and they put the remittance, it took them, as it were, you know, they didn't see the urgency to turn up. And that's why sometimes in the sugar industry during that period, we had turnout like 45% of the total workforce. And I'm sure it affected others too in that regard. So we do hope that employees and Guyanese and those who are benefit, but rather see this as an opportunity to want to better their skills, because it gives you a bit more flexibility in being retrained and being able to adapt to what the change in demand. Because the skills that we needed 5 years ago are different in some areas than what we need today, and that's why we'll also have to do some element of retraining, and that's what that was intended to do. The issue with the processing of work permits and visas, yes, sometimes it's tedious, but there are a number of constraints there that has to be addressed. One of which is that we need to ensure that we are not, as we saw in some instances, a haven for human trafficking. It's a big issue globally, and countries are marked down for instances of that, and that's why we have to put the necessary safeguards in place to guard against this system being abused for the purposes of human trafficking. And we had the issue here with the thousands of Haitians who came, and then you couldn't find them back because they went somewhere else, and that is why that has caused. And there were other instances of other persons and other nationality too, Bangladeshi and so forth, who've had that instance. So that's why the system has had to be tidied up. There was a second issue too, which is outside our control, especially, and it didn't only affect Guyana, but it also affect a number of other CARICOM countries, whereby the airlines themselves, with the visas and the necessary documents were produced, and the airlines were not allowing persons to board. So you had persons turning up to the airport, whether it's in India, whether it's in Philippines, and the airlines were not allowing them because they themselves too were a bit queasy about whether the validity or the authenticity of the documents that were given. So we had that as a constraint, We've had to write the airlines themselves and say, look, these documents are legit, and if you have a query, revert to us, but, and have some confidence in our process. So you had those issues in addition to, sometimes we think that the problem is only with us delaying, but I agree with you, we have to look at ways in which we can make it a bit more enlightened. We have to look at a wider immigration policy. We need, and these are discussions that the President and others are having in terms of how do we approach those issues. But some of these matters are complex, but also they have to be approached in a very cautious and a forward-thinking, forward-looking way too.
I want to indicate, in addition to the entities that others have raised this morning, in specific relation to the oil and gas sector, and only in specific relation to this sector, because this conversation is focusing only primarily on one sector, and this is highly problematic, and I'll tell you why in a second. That in regard to that sector, we need to include the local content secretariat. Very, very significant, because they're the ones who are at the moment for this sector capturing the medium-term data that is given by the international private sector about what they are likely to need and what their medium-term goals are. So for training institutions don't just pick themselves up one day and decide that you can deliver somebody, even if you need them next year, you need a lead time. So we need some data, and this is a problem that the university itself has had, because since 2017, we pulled these people together, these agencies together twice, and asked them to share information about their projected needs. And none of them wanted to give that data because first of all, they consider it to be a risk, and then it's a some competitive stuff. So we've had to kind of retrofit what we were thinking about doing from other models. Now, the labor issue in the country, as far as we are seeing, and that's emerging, and again, the university's two major contributions would be one in research, which we are doing. We're doing research amongst our own students, our own alum, and those who we have now added, those who have been rejected from the university for some reason, because that is a big database. That's almost half of the people who would be applying to us on an annual basis, and this is about 4,000 or 5,000 people a year. But we have just decided that this is a team of people who were striving towards something, who might not have met our minimum standards, or may have met it because of space or something else, not being able to take up. So this is a captive market that we could do things with. So that's a huge number of people. So on the research side, that's what we're doing. We should be able to bring out research on our alumni in the diaspora here, students as well as this team, in about a month's time, because that work is happening. We've just embarked as well on a nationwide survey. And we believe that this is important because the sector survey data that we see coming out is leaving us a little uncomfortable. Anyway, let me just leave it like that. But I just wanted to say the complexity of what the country is dealing with, which is a good problem in the medium term, a bad problem in the short term, is that we are not only looking for labor for the oil and gas sector. We know that this sector is leaching workers away from the public sector, so the government sector, even the university, and of course the local private sector is very, 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 very much impacted by this. And then we also have to think of people, if we want a nation, to the point of somebody who first spoke, if we want a nation of everyone working for these sectors, or do we want to be able to train people to some extent to be masters of their own fate as entrepreneurs and otherwise. So this is at least 5 or 6 sectors of people we're looking at training. The other thing is, when we talk about these thousands of people, we are not talking about people at this particular moment who are at a higher level of certification, so university certification. We're not talking about thousands of people in that area at the moment. We're speaking about hundreds. We're speaking about thousands in the secondary and tertiary level levels of certification. So people who can do skilled things, people who can, drive something, et cetera. In 4 or 5 years' time, though, we will need to be taking over, training a workforce that can take over from the international private sector who are here setting up these projects, as well as those who will have to come into the country, there's no doubt about it, in the short term to kind of run us over this period where we're struggling. So that is something that we have to think about, and you have to have the data, and it's emerging now, only now, about what those numbers look like at those various levels and the different occupations. So there are a couple of studies that were done in 2016, 2017, not by us, but we were involved, right, in that gave us some numbers. Those numbers are changing rapidly because the numbers looked at one sector, they didn't look at the local sector. So that's something. The other thing that I want to underscore this morning is really the question of policy, the importance of policy, and that this amount of work that you were talking about here cannot be done by a committee. If you make this work be done by a committee, it will never get done. This work has to be the work of a very targeted, well-staffed, well-qualified unit that has at least 5 sectors, five entities who are working together on it. And a committee can kind of oversee it and so on. But you were talking about a huge project here, a huge amount of work, and definitely Ministry of Labor, Ministry of Education, PSM, local content, and definitely the local private sector, whomever their representatives should be involved in overseeing that. But you need a unit, and you need it like yesterday. Now, we need it by yesterday, and all those people who are talking about, why we're not up to speed at this point. One of the things that we have to remember is that Exxon brought this project to production in half the time it had ever done in anywhere else in the world. These projects take 7 to 8 years. They brought this project to production in 4 years. So even if we knew everything that they needed on day one, we would not have been able to be ready, and we didn't know it. We're now knowing it. So while we have to do this quickly, we cannot be hard on ourselves, too hard on ourselves to think that we did not prepare. We just were new. There's a learning curve, it's going to be super steep, and what we're doing now is what we need. But I want to really impress upon the fact that the Diaspora Unit is going to be able to deal with one small part of this. You need the resources, and we need to ensure that whoever is dealing with this committee comes out, this gathering comes out today, to ensure and insist that a targeted unit gets resourced immediately to help to work with all these entities who will bring clarity and a resolution to this. This also, of course, requires the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on the immigration side, because we have these issues that have to do with permitting and all of that, which from the university side, we know how long it takes to get somebody in, a student, et cetera. And the other last thing I wanted to talk about is really the cost. Many people are speaking about the cost. We have a certain fix now, at least from our end, on how many people we believe we can train. So Guyana has got, if you listen to many of the countries that have been new producers over the last 5 to 10 years, Guyana actually has a lot of what it already needs. What we don't have is the scale. So scalability becomes very, very important. So instead, for instance, at the university, where we trained 40 engineers, 40 different types of engineers a year in 5 disciplines, so that would give us, 200 engineers? Now we have to double that, but our labs are not big enough to do it. So while we have the numbers of students applying, while we know that we need this, Now we have to look at scalability, and I think this is the same for GTI, for all these entities. So who pays for that? That's a very significant point, and this has to be policy. The other aspect of this is if the people who are uptaking this, these people need to be able to, I don't know what the government policy is on it, and it might be a little hard for them to do something, you know how these contracts are, but somehow along the line, we have to figure out who pays for it, because this gentleman is absolutely correct. There are people who show up every day saying we could give 70 certifications in specific areas and for infrastructure in particular, engineering in particular, but it's going to cost $2,000 US or $3,000 US per student to get this certification. And anybody who has to work in this industry is going to need between 5 to 12 different types of certification. So HSC, not only in your discipline, so health and safety, this and that, and all these other things you're going to need. That costs something. Who is going to pay for that? Because the ordinary person who might be skilled, who might have interest, cannot pay for this. So some part of this has to be a financial policy that allows us to help people who are the best picks to get into these programs quickly and to not have to pay for them up front. Maybe they have to pay for them otherwise. And my final comment, and I apologize for speaking this much and this long, but I was listening intently and thinking through this. The final comment this morning that we started, it's not part of the year thing, but it's part in a certain sense, has to do with these $40,000 people. I'm sorry, I don't remember what the program is called, and I don't mean to be pejorative by calling them this, but this is a description that everybody would understand. If we begin to, they needed that money, definitely they needed it, and they need it still. But one of the things about human behavior, and I'm a social psychologist, right, is that if you begin to set people up to believe that they're entitled to something, with giving nothing back in return, if you don't deal with that from the very get-go, you have a monkey on your back that you will never get off. They begin to demand more and more because they believe it's an entitlement. So I believe, having gotten them past the moment of real dire need that was there, we need to now look at those programs and say, you'll get the $40,000 for 6 months. But within that 6 months, you need to go and do this. I need to see you sign up to do this. You need to be in a class to do this to continue getting this. We have some of them on our campus in Berbice, I'm telling you. If you ask them to fetch a bucket, their hand is hurting them. If you ask them to walk to the door, their foot is hurting them. If you ask them to pick up a phone, they can't, they're hoarse that day. I'm telling you, right? And so they just, in their minds, not all of them, but some of them, this is an entitlement. They don't need to do anything for this money. And this is going to be a problem going forward. So we need now to say, okay, we helped you. We want to help you. We want you to do better than this. If you are enrolled in a program, we will give you maybe 10,000 more, you know. And if we see you doing better and so on, we could find you a job and you will get better and so on. And this is not only in that area. I'm just speaking because I have experience personally in that area with these people. And that's very significant. The other issue we have to do is to deal with the capture of the secondary schools. What happens to these hundreds and hundreds of students who come out of secondary school every year, like right now, CXC is coming out next week. And a lot of students who would like to go on to study will not be able to do that. You know why? They can't afford it. The parents are just waiting for them to get a job to help. But this is where we have to catch them. So you need to find a way to capture them. So you not only have to pay their tuition, but you have to pay something for them. We have to give them something like a salary so that they can study and give their parents whatever they need to help them and get that off their back. Because that's a huge number of people. And once they get into the attitude or the mindset, as the professor would have indicated this morning and others, of not doing anything or working at a very low level and then liming or something, then you do not get them back. It's really hard and it takes years to get them back. And we need them now, and they're here.
I like the start of this, and I have to throw my support behind Professor Mohamed. The scale of operations that this type of activity needs is essentially a unit and not just a committee, so I want to throw my support behind that. Some folks on my left, I just want to offer some suggestions as you think through that national database. And my suggestion is don't recreate the wheel. The Ministry of Labor in particular, and this goes back to the individual to my right that indicated that they should probably lead this operation, they have a job bank. All they need to do is beef that up a little bit, and it would be able to perform the functions that we wanted to perform. And I think as it relates to helping that database work well, I think every recruitment agency has their own database as well. So it's all about whether or not you want to lean on those experiences that you already have to essentially upgrade an existing platform rather than recreating a new one, and you've wasted a lot of resources. And one of the things you need to do when you're creating any sort of database, you have to provide incentives that will allow people or encourage persons to register on it. It's not enough to just have that job bank there. Why should persons register on your job bank, and why should they divulge things like their resume information, the skills that they have, and what they're looking for? One thing that I'll share with folks is that I work for the Center for Local Business Development, and we manage a portal. And one way we've incentivized registration on that portal, we offer a lot of free courses. So along the same vein, if you have courses, if you have programs that are interesting for persons to register on the platform, you'd be able to get that sort of following for your national database on jobs and skills. Data. My second suggestion is around data. And I don't want, I'm not trying to hit folks in the room, but we as Guyanese, we have a special talent on speaking anecdotally. But we also need to think about how we're able to leverage the data we have, as well as to gather the data that we need. I want to commend the work of the Bureau of Statistics. You're with the Bureau of Statistics, right? They work very hard to collect data as it relates to informing national policy. But when it comes to collecting data from the private sector in general, persons believe that the Bureau of Statistics and GRA become the same person, and they withhold information that is critical in informing national policy, especially as it relates to labor policy. So one thing I'm going to encourage, and I'm going to target the PSC representative and the GMSA representative today, please help your members become comfortable with the idea of sharing information with the Bureau of Statistics. And in that way, it helps to inform a lot of other things that will trickle down as it relates to how we choose to address the labor force requirement going forward. Finally, the gentleman across from me, Ritesh, he presented a very powerful framework that we could use to guide the unit. I'm manifesting a unit. To guide a unit. So I think one of the next steps to come out of this session is to just have a draft framework. The diagram is a very good start, but we can take it a step further to draft out things like a terms of reference. So in that way, when this body suggests something to government, they already have something to work with. They have the essence of it sketched out. So that concludes my 2 cents. Good stuff so far.
I mean, very importantly is that this proposed structure, noting that we have a unit within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, are we suggesting that the Diaspora Unit will be taking the lead role? It's not a repetitive positioning, but it's just for clarity. Of course, I've heard you say anything that has to do with skills, labor needs, it requires massive networking, partnerships, collaboration as well with key agencies, Ministry of Labor, Ministry of Education, etc., etc. And so identifying those specific responsibilities, I firmly believe will be able to realize what is this comprehensive agenda. What I'm not seeing here, I think it's very critical. If we want to realize by 2025, 2024, the outputs of what is the government's position and ensuring that we satisfy the labor market needs, then I'm not seeing there what are the targeted outputs. I'm seeing University of Guyana, technical and vocational institute schools. So are we to assume that by 2024 we will satisfy the 1,000 welders we are referencing the 1,000 electricians that we were looking at. Overarchingly, a labor market need of 5,000 persons to fit various occupational programs. That's one. Secondly, key to all of that, having a comprehensive structure, monitoring and evaluation plays a very critical role in ensuring that in a step-by-step process, we can be able to have timely feedback reporting as to how are we achieving the targets that we have set up. And so I think the monitoring evaluation, even though we have a very comprehensive data representation, I think that should be included somewhere to make it more realizable. Thirdly, I just want to share for all of us to understand as well, if we look at the Singapore's model as to how they treat with labor needs to satisfy the various markets, they have, and I heard it's coming out from the discussion here today, is that they have this tripartite arrangement where the private sector plays a critical, and I'm putting that in bold red, critical role in identifying within the respective sectors what are the needs that are required for, let's say, the next year. So the respective sectors, forestry, labor, infrastructure, education, by extension, the other areas, they compile those lists, and those lists are now submitted or supplied to a government's task force that will review these lists, and hence these lists are now submitted to the Ministry of Education. Now the Ministry of Education has that umbrella responsibility of all the training institutes, organizations within the country. And so those lists are now submitted to the respective institutes, and then they are now budgeting accordingly to ensure that by the end of that fiscal year, we are satisfying programs of persons coming out to move into that area of need. And so I believe we can adopt an existing model that is there, and we flesh out accordingly. And I think that makes it easy. And so by another year or 2 or maximum 4 years, we can say, listen, safety, we can be able to chart out 1,000 or 2,000 persons in the respective fields. So it's deliberate, it is intentional, it is comprehensive, and so I don't have to pull out of the clouds what will a budget allocation be for 2024. I know exactly I need to train so much people. These are the resources that are required for the training, and so it is impacted into the budget allocation. And so the output here is that by 2024, coming out of the technical institutes in Guyana, we will have approximately 3,000 students completing a diploma in electrical installation or mechanical engineering technology who are now transiting safely to the University of Guyana to ensure they complete their degree programs. So I just want to put that in the context for us to have that thinking as we move the process forward.